course, it worked for a time, but then, as usual, someone usually decides that it's better if he's the king all the time. And that one was Naemul of the Kim clan. And yes, this is the very same Kim name that's so popular in Korea. And this is because of this historical event. Because he... with all of them, I mean, 22% of Koreans are Kim. Yeah, there are other very popular names, but Kim is, I think, the most popular. It's like 22%. So, and that's because one of the reasons that the Kim name became so popular is because he made a decree that only the Kim clan should be kings. And he also had the Pak was the other clan, and said that and the queens shall come only from the Kim and the Pak clans. And they made a differentiation. They said that there were people, the Seongo, the sacred bone people, are who descended purely from these two clans. And that is the Kingo, the true bone people, who were at least parentally from the Kim clan, but their mothers could be from any of the clans. So that's why in Korea everyone tried to convince people that they are from the Kim clan. And over time, it became the most popular name. So, yeah, yes. Of course, again, don't discuss it with the right-wing Kim. He might be insulted that he is a real descendant of this Naemul of the Kim clan. So anyway, we have the Kims in power finally. That's in Silla. That is the northeastern of the three kingdoms. And they conquered Kaya, and then came the really Game of Thrones part of the whole setup, that how Silla unified Korea was that, meanwhile in China was, after 300 years of, more than 400 years of division, was finally united by a dynasty again in 589. And for some reason, the Sui emperors wanted to conquer Korea to, you know, if you have united China, you are quite getting good at conquering territories, so you want to carry on. And they led massive attacks against the northern Korean state of Goguryeo. Now the problem is that Korea is quite well defended from the northwest, because there's the Great Yalu River, there are mountains, and the Koreans built massive forts. So the problem of the Chinese were that they were sieging these forts for years, and they couldn't conquer them. So what happened is basically one of the biggest military operations that happened in the world before the 20th century, I think, that the second Sui emperor organized basically the whole force of China to attack Korea. And he had the idea of bypassing the large fort at the Yalu River and marching down into South Korea. And the staging grounds were in Liaotong province, and they had, I think, 600,000 people amassed. And of course, in history there are many historical stories saying large numbers, but they are usually not true. So, for example, when the Greek and Persian wars, you know, in the yeah, Herodotus, but the numbers in Herodotus are usually a bit inflated. So, but what the Chinese did is probably likely true that they really organized 600,000 people. Just to give you an example, when they started the attack and they said that the first troops to leave from the staging ground, and then they were marching out, and they were marching out, and they were marching out, and the last troops left 2 months later. So the whole, I just try to imagine 600,000 Chinese in a line. It takes several hundred kilometers, and it took them just 2 months from the beginning to the end to leave the camp. Now, of course, the problem with such a large army are logistics. So the Chinese said, okay, everyone will carry 80 kilograms of rice. So the army will be able to fed itself. But what happened is that, of course, the soldiers didn't want to carry 80 kilograms of rice, plus weapons. So basically what they did when they were camped, they dig holes and hid their rice and got rid of it. Which, of course, now the problem was that the Chinese strategy was bypassing the stronghold in the northern border and just going down deep into the heartlands of the enemy. But that also means that they don't have supply lines because they didn't conquer the stronghold at the border. So they didn't have supply lines and they ran out of food because their soldiers basically hid and threw away the food because they couldn't carry it. There was some attempts to send naval reinforcements, but after a few battles it failed. And the failure was so big that the Sui dynasty actually collapsed. And it was quickly taken over by the Tang dynasty, which lasted for 300 years, so they were a lot more popular. And the Tang also wanted, just for prestige reasons, to do something about Korea, but they were a bit more smarter. And they said that divide and rule. The Taizong emperor, the first emperor of the Tang dynasty, decided to make an alliance with Silla. So Silla was the Korean kingdom furthest away from China. Just to go back to the map, as you see, Silla is the red one. They are the furthest away from China, and Koguryu, the blue one, was that has already been massively under attack by the Chinese. So now the Chinese changed tactics and they said, okay, let's ally with Silla. And with the local ally, we can beat the other two Korean states. So and that's what they did. And the Silla also tried pretty hard to suck up to the Chinese. So they adopted Chinese dress codes, they adopted Chinese calendars, and their queen even embroidered the silk tapestry with the poetry and sent it to the gifters to the Chinese emperor. So they did everything to be in good terms with the Chinese. So the Chinese sent a fleet. That's another lesson they learned, that you don't want to walk over into Korea. So they sent a fleet and invaded Paekja with the help of Silla. And then they won, and the Chinese made Paekja into a province. And Silla was not so happy about that. And then the Chinese also conquered Koguryo, and Silla was even less happy about that, because they realized that instead of being one of the three kingdoms of Korea, they are now the only kingdom in Korea, while the rest is controlled by China. So Silla turned coats and started a war against the Chinese. And thankfully for the Koreans, the Chinese were also involved in a war at the Tibetan front. So Silla managed to conquer Korea and beat out the Chinese. And they unified Korea, mostly. So that's how we have the first unified Korea. The problem with the Silla was that they were basically sleazy bastards, as you see from the history. And what they did not really win over the people of Paekja or Koguryo for them. So for the next few hundred years, the problem was that there were constant rebellions against the rule of Silla all over Korea, the other parts, the other two kingdoms. So the unification by Silla was somewhat unified, but not exactly successful story. Still, it was a golden age of Korean civilization. And under also the sacred born kings, so those who were both parentally and maternally from the Kin and the Paek line, they died out. But the ones from the Kim, paternally from the Kim clan, they ruled on. And they had Chinese-style exams. Now, that's also one interesting thing, that, you know, the Chinese system is that they had exams, and those who were good worked on the bureaucracy. And in China it really worked. So for 2000 years, any peasant, if he studied hard enough, could become the chancellor, basically the prime minister of China. And it really happened. But both in Korea and both in Japan, the system was never, or very rarely, adopted perfectly. Because always the aristocrats were influential enough to make special cases. So for example, they had Chinese level exams, but you had to belong to the aristocracy to rise to the top ranks. So they were not really this meritocratic as the Chinese wanted. And because of that, many talented Koreans actually migrated to China in this time. So, and they could also migrate to China because the Silla, the kingdom of Korea, was quite a good naval empire. So they were trading and they had a lot of warships, and basically they were dominating the trade around China's seas. And this is a footnote, there was also Balhae. This is a small state to the north of Korea, which is culturally Korean. So some say that Silla did not technically unify the whole of Korea because there was another Korean state. But Balhae is north of the current border of Korea. So it's outside the current Korea, but it was a Korean, ethnically it was a Korean state. This is basically just an example of how, what the Silla period meant and some of the highlights of their architecture. Okay, so what we had is a unification that was not so successful, and it became even worse because there were a lot of peasant revolts, and basically the rule of the dynasty shrank to the capital area. And all over Korea there were warlords took over, and they created their own little countries. And the warlords were of quite various backgrounds. Some of them were merchants, some of them were generals, some of them were descendants of the royal family, some of them were simply bandit leaders who ended up rulers of large territories. So, and even Buddhist monks, yeah. So it was quite a dynamic thing. It's like in Game of Thrones when Littlefinger says that chaos is a ladder. You remember that part? So it's typically that kind, when anyone could become a warlord and can try to conquer most of Korea. For example, one of the most notorious ones is Konghia, who was a member of the royal family, who went to become a Buddhist monk, and he took control of the northern territories, and he said that basically he refounded Goguryeo, so he took up the old name of the northern kingdom of the three kingdoms. And then there was another general who then took over the southwestern territories and claimed that, okay, we are Paekya again. So basically all three kingdoms were fighting against each other again, because the two ones that have been conquered earlier were now refounded by totally different people, by the way. So, and the most interesting one is Goguryeo, because they were the ones who unified finally Korea, and because they were some really crazy thing doing there, because this Konghia guy, as I said, he was a monk, and after a time, he had this idea that actually he is Buddha. So he decreed that he is Buddha, and he said that anyone who disagrees him should be executed, which is really acting like a Buddha. And even his sons, he even killed off his sons and family. And he became such a big tyrant that even his own generals revolted against him. And one of the generals, who was originally a merchant, Wang Kaon, he took over his boss place, basically. He took over the Goguryeo, and he founded a dynasty and called it Goryeo. So that's how Goryeo was founded. He rebuilt Pyongyang and also made his hometown a capital. And after some struggles with the other three kingdoms, using some internal struggles in Paekya, and the last king of Silla decided to basically donate his kingdom to this one town. And so he inherited one of the other kingdoms, and then he finally defeated the third one. So he united Korea again. And even today the name Korea comes from the Goryeo dynasty. And just to stabilize his rule, he married the daughters of 29 different warlords to have... Yeah, actually I think it's 30, because he had an original wife and married 29 from the various warlords. They were a polygamic society. And this was a much more successful unification. They really got together a strong state. And the aristocratic powers were somewhat limited, but there were still ways for the aristocracy to rise to high ranks even without passing the exams. So then the problem came from the north. Because the Tang dynasty fell into civil war, the Chinese Tang dynasty fell into civil war, and then the warriors tribes, nomadic peoples in the north became quite strong. So one of them, the first to rise in power, were the Khitans, who founded the so-called Liao dynasty. And at first they were friendly with the Koreans. They even sent gifts like horses and camels. But then, I mentioned earlier the small northern Korean state of Balhae. The Khitans destroyed this Balhae, and the king of Goryeo decided that, this is not good, they are killing Koreans. We are not friends with them anymore. So when the Khitan emperor sent the next gift with an envoy and 50 camels, the Koreans decided to excite the envoy to an island and to starve the camels to death. To show the fierce Khitans that they shouldn't mess with Koreans. Poor camels. Of course, that could only mean war. And the so-called Liao-Korean wars are one of the most lackluster conflicts in history, I think, because what happened is that this happened in 942, and the Koreans fortified their borders, knowing that they have provoked a response by killing off those poor camels, and then they waited for 30 years. And that's when finally the Khitans had some free time to do something about the Koreans. And it ended up in a stalemate, and then the second invasion ended up in a stalemate. And then the third invasion, the Koreans defeated the Khitans, but the next year the Khitans came with another army, and then the Koreans said that, okay, let's call it a stalemate. So basically this was around 50 years of not too impressive warfare. And after a time, there came another nomadic tribe, the Jurchen, who conquered the Khitans, and they overran over northern China, and they founded the Qin dynasty in northern China. And then the Koreans started to debating whether to move their capital, keep their capital in the north or move to the south. Because if you have the capital in the north, that means that you can control the armies with a much quicker response time. So if you want to wage war in the northern frontier, then you move the capital to the north. If you want peace with the northern frontier, then you move the capital to the south. And there was also some geomantic debates about the chi of which capital is better or worse. And in the end, they moved the capital to the south, choosing the more pacifist version. Policy. This is also a time when Korea basically had a system similar to the shoguns in Japan. So while they had a king, they had a military dictator who took over the country. And that's a very funny story how it came to be, because but following Chinese principles, civilians ranked higher than military officers. And then, and that's a very nice thing, I think, in Chinese civilization. But you can overdo it. And the Koreans overdid it. And basically their military and generals really hated the civilian bureaucrats who were always looking down upon the military guys. And it's not a good idea to look down upon military guys when they have the weapons and you don't. So the great drama happened at a martial arts competition in 1170, when an old general was forced to fight the young champion. And of course the old general was defeated. And then a civilian bureaucrat mocked him and even slapped him for being what a pussy is that he's beaten by the young champion. So what happened is that all of the army rose up in rebellion and they killed off all of the bureaucrats. And they took over the country for a century at least. Yeah, that's a smart idea. And then of course they started killing off each other. But that's why you have military juntas, that the generals assassinated each other and they became tyrants, and then they toppled the other one, and finally one clan established a kind of a dictatorial dynasty. And they still had the royal dynasty as well, and then the Mongolians arrived. So the Mongolians came, and at first they were friendly with the Koreans because they had the Khitans and the Jurchen between them. So they had, the enemy of my enemy. But the Koreans refused to give tribute to the Mongols. And again we have a good example.
The Mongolians really tried to crush the Chinese wall that comes out.
No, but they can. When the Mongolian, okay, as I said, Yunchans have already conquered northern China. So when the Mongolians came, northern China was not held by the Chinese. That was held by another nomadic empire. So the Koreans didn't want to give the tribute the Mongolians demanded, so the Mongols invaded. And this was again a bit of a half-hearted invasion. So Korea has the history of invaders being a bit half-hearted by it. The Mongolians skipped the strongholds, these very same strongholds that the Chinese had so many problems, and they sacked the capital of Korea. And then the king sued for peace, but the terms were too severe. So what the military dictator of Korea decided is that they will resist. And he evacuated capital to an island because they had a very supreme fleet. And for the following 40 years, what they did is that they had the capital on the island and they used their fleet to protect that, while the Mongolians ravaged the countryside. And there was peace and then war and peace and war, so it's like the Mongolians came and they burnt all the farmlands. And then the Koreans said, okay, we give up. What are your terms? Well, send the son of your king to be hostages, yeah. And then they sent the remote cousins of the king. And the Mongolians said, up yours, we will come again. And then they came again, and okay, then they sent the closer cousins, but still not the sons of the... So this was going on for a time, and finally, after a heroic but futile resistance, the Koreans capitulated to the Mongolians. And they were treated moderately well. They were made vassals, but they were not annexed. So Korea was a vassal kingdom to the Mongolians, who were ruling China as well. And for example, they married the kings. The Koreans also had to participate in the Mongolian invasion against Japan. You know, the one that ended up with the kamikaze hurricane blowing away the fleet. So that was the Mongolian period of Korea, and they were involved. The Mongolians created quite a great cultural exchange between the two ends of Eurasia, so between Europe, between Middle East and China and Korea. So there were some benefits of the Mongolian rule, but altogether the Koreans were meh with it. So they were okay, but they didn't really like it. So when the Mongolians collapsed, the Koreans were quite happy to get rid of them. And then they also get rid of their old dynasty, because the old dynasty became quite, lost a lot of prestige by becoming a vassal of the Mongolians. So that's how, so the Mongolians left and they restarted their kingdom, but they were quite weak. And another problem they had is that the Japanese had the Sengoku Jidai going on. And we know that the Sengoku Jidai is full of ninjas and samurais and geishas. But actually what the world noticed of the Sengoku Jidai is that the Japanese sending out thousands of fucking pirates. So because when you don't have, that's why they were called Wokko, that is, wo is the, wa is the term for Japan, and ko means pirates. So it's a lot of peasants and a lot of small samurai just took a boat and went on raping and pillaging the other countries because they had no central power. So yeah, so it was quite a nuisance for both the Chinese and for both the Koreans. They had really had enough of the Japanese of doing all this piracy and raiding and stuff like that. So there was a war hero who fought against the Mongols and against the Japanese pirates, and basically he took power. After a bit of debates, he was sent to conquer Liaotung Peninsula, which was a territory that was claimed by Ming China as well. And he decided that I don't want to start a war with China. Instead, I will start a war with my ruler and take over his throne. That seems easier. And after two puppet kings, he was a diplomat. So at first he had a few puppet kings from the same old dynasty, and then he crowned himself. And he moved the capital to the south, so this is when Seoul became the capital. And he was a Neo-Confucian, so he suppressed the Buddhists. And he created a Neo-Confucian ideal. So this is when Confucianism became really 100% adapted to Korean society. They finally had the exams, and they had these exams, and they had, for example, they disallowed, early the first son, the eldest son was allowed to inherit, and all the things that are in the Confucian ideas. They introduced that quite late. So nowadays, Korea is considered to be one of the most Confucian states, but that was actually quite late in their history, because we are already in the 15th century. And the last interesting thing basically that happened to them was that the Sengoku Jidai ended in Japan, and Toyotomi Hideyoshi unified Japan, and then he invaded Korea, because he wanted to go for China, and he had a lot of samurai there were no wars in Japan, so they were out of business, so they wanted something to do, basically. So they at first they quickly overran the Joseon military because they were quite weak, and they had like 200,000 battle-hardened samurai. So they quickly overran them in 1592, but then they organized the guerrilla resistance against the Japanese. And the Ming China also sent military aid against Japan, and it became a long war with long peace negotiations that broke down and war intensified again. And that's one of the most epic persons of Korean history lived. He is Sun Sin, the famous admiral. He developed iron-plated turtle ships. So back we are in the 16th century, and we have ships that are iron-plated, equipped with cannons, and even they had a dragon's head, which they could deliver hydrogen sulfide gas, more to frighten than to actually poison. But anyway, it was quite an epic thing. And he was an excellent admiral who raided the supply lines of the Japanese. And then the Japanese, well, they still had the ninjas, you know. So anyway, the Japanese came up with a cunning plan, with a double agent plan, that they had a Japanese spy who planted false information to the Koreans. And the Korean court, following this misleading information, ordered Admiral Sun Sin to attack. But he realized that it was a trap, so he refused. But because he refused, he was jailed for insubordination. So the Japanese succeeded to get rid of the best Korean admiral. And then the second wave of Japanese invasion began in '97, and the new Korean admiral was quite stupid, and he managed to run the whole 150 Korean warships into an ambush of a huge Japanese transport force of more than 500 ships full of samurai, and into close combat, so the Japanese could board the Korean ships and took over. So after this, the whole Korean navy was only composed of 12 ships. And that was the time when the king realized that, okay, where was our good admiral? In the jail? Yeah, okay, let's reinstate him and do something. And he was given 12 ships, and he managed to defeat the Japanese with those 12 ships. And when Toyotomi Hideyoshi died in Japan, the Japanese gave up with the invasion of Korea. And Yu Sun Sin was chasing them as they were retreating back to Japan, and then a stray bullet killed him. So the big hero of the war did not survive the war. So, but he still has statues. Yeah. So, and after that, Koreans, the last phase of the pre-modern Korean history was that the Manchurians overran the Chinese, and the Koreans protested, but then they finally accepted because they were trying to support the Ming dynasty, the old Chinese dynasty. But when the Manchus invaded Korea, then they said, okay, we accept, you are the big boss, you are the Chinese emperor now, okay. But from that point forward, they considered themselves to be the sole real Confucian kingdom. So, although they accepted diplomatically China, they did not accept them as the inheritor of the legacy of the Chinese culture. They considered that the legacy of the Confucian culture is Korea. So the last period yeah, I already talked about this. So the last peaceful period was in an isolationist period. So for the last few centuries before the 20th century, Korea closed its borders to the others. They treated China as the big brother, and they treated Japan as the younger brother. Basically, that was their diplomatic word. And there were peaceful 200 years of peace and prosperity. So, for example, the population of Korea from 2 million in the early Middle Ages rose to 6 million by the post-Mongol era, and it rose to 20 million by the end of the 19th century. And basically, then what happened is that Japan modernized, and they became imperialists themselves, and they first forced trade treaties on Korea, and then they conquered them early in the 20th century, and that's how the ancient history of Korea ended. So, thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, you can ask me while after I'm leaving.
Tell me, what is your favorite movie or any book or something that describes any period, historic period piece, like Admiral Roaring Currents or War of the Arrow? Those are my favorites. So, do you have any work of art that depicts the Korean history that you like?
For Korean, no. My main specialty is China, and I'm a big fan of the Emperor and the Assassin.
Yeah.
It deals with the same story as the what is the other? There's the more popular movie on that topic. But yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. But yeah, that's a good.
It's only right?